Hi, I'm Yitzhak Berger. I teach Hebrew at Drisha. In Parashat Yitro, the moment of revelation at Har Sinai is, of course, a very key moment in the history of Am Yisrael, and from the perspective of the Torah, for really human history more generally. Rabbi Silber is fond of saying that initially, in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, humanity occupied sacred space exclusively. And it was really when Adam and Eve sinned that they were banished from that sacred space, and there began a process whereby humans had to regain that. And the regaining of that sacred space was not going to encompass the entire world. You find various events that bespeak this effort. Abraham going to Har HaMoriah to sacrifice his son. That became a holy place. Of course, Har Sinai in our own Parsha, as well as others. What's interesting is to see how in the lead-up to the revelation at Har Sinai, one finds references to some of these earlier episodes. So, for example, whereas Adam and Eve were not supposed to eat from a certain tree in the garden, Eve even makes up a prohibition that they were not supposed to touch that tree lest they die. Very similar language appears with respect to Bnei Yisrael at Har Sinai. They were not supposed to approach that mountain. They were not supposed to touch it lest they die. Similar references appear to the story of Abraham at the Akedah. For example, there was a 3-day process by which Abraham traveled to the mountain before he actually saw it, merachok, from afar. And similarly, in the case of the revelation at Har Sinai, there is a 3-day process of build-up until Klal Yisrael is ready to accept the Torah. After the Aseret HaDibrot are enumerated, it in fact says that Am Yisrael was intimidated by the experience, vaya'amdu merachok, and they stood from afar, reminiscent of the terminology in the story of Abraham. The motif of 3 days, in fact, is something that appears elsewhere. It's not limited to these stories where you might expect it. 3 days is a motif that signifies, at least in some cases, the build-up to a revelation or to an experience of reconnection with God. To give an example that would probably not come to mind first, in the book of Yonah, when Yonah goes from a state where he feels that a fish has swallowed him, he has gone as far down as a human being can go, and eventually starts realizing that this fish will be a source of salvation and that he will yet bring sacrifices to God on his holy mountain. And that is a 3-day process by which that fish goes from tomb, where he felt he would be buried, to the womb that would give him his rebirth. The same is true of the 3-day process that he was supposed to go through to tell the people of Nineveh that they had to return to God, a process that he actually does not complete before they on their own complete the tshuva process. So when we look at the process in our parsha, where Am Yisrael underwent the 3-day preparation period, experienced the revelation at Har Sinai, it's important to place this into a larger context of human beings reclaiming that sacred space, trying to reattain the connection with the divine that, as the Torah presents it, human beings have from the beginning of history. Because, in fact, the entire course of human history boils down to an effort to regain that connection that was lost. Shabbat Shalom.